Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe on the SABC News channel. Let's go back to that conversation that we started just before the break with Melike Trigg, who's an Associate Reporting Officer at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and she's in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso at the moment. Let's join her once again on Skype. On the line, she's on the line this time. Melike, thanks so much indeed for coming back. Just before the break, you were describing the situation that most of these refugees had been fleeing from. And is this violence escalating? Are we seeing more and more of it in wider areas?
Yes, thank you for having me back. I was explaining that we saw recent displacement in the north of the country linked to armed violence, which have led more than 11,000 people fleeing to a neighboring city. Local communities have been extremely hospitable and have been on the front line responding, but they are at breaking point.
How have you been able to assist them?
So UNHCR has been providing shelter for the community and has also distributed masks, essential items, and we're supporting local communities and local authorities who are accelerating efforts to register new arrivals and to relocate them to another site.
With so many people, I guess, in the middle of a pandemic, all sorts of other issues start to arise when we talk about the plight of refugees.
Indeed, we're seeing a convergence of crisis in Burkina Faso, where there is armed conflict, extreme poverty, food insecurity, environmental change, and also the COVID-19 pandemic. The sites where internally displaced persons have settled are often overcrowded, which makes it difficult for the respect of the prevention measures for COVID-19. So UNHCR and other partners are accelerating efforts to make sure to build new shelters to allow these transfer rapidly, and also are conducting sensitization sessions. We're also distributing items for people to be able to wash their hands, so soap, hand washing devices, and we're supporting also authorities in strengthening the health system.
I would imagine with, again, such a large group of people, there are particular vulnerabilities, particularly for children, that must be with these people. Yes,
indeed, there's a majority of women and children among those displaced. We have seen generally in the country that there has been an increase in sexual violence that is widespread, so our teams are working to prevent and respond to such instances.
And what about the concern for issues like malnutrition? Emergency food aid can help, but I guess over a longer term, this must be a concern.
It is indeed a concern, and we see the impact, the socioeconomic impact of COVID and on food security. We've been working with partners and other UN organizations to distribute essential aid, but we're really calling for the international community to help us strengthen the humanitarian response and also sustainable development.
You said a little bit earlier on that the host communities are at a breaking point. Describe what that means and what can happen if these refugees continue to flee their areas.
Indeed, the local communities have shown extreme generosity, often welcoming those displaced populations into their own homes. but often the displaced population still lack basic shelter and are sleeping under the open sky. Burkina Faso is one of the least developed countries in the world, or amongst one of the least, and indeed local communities themselves have been struggling with available resources, which they are now sharing with those populations.
Are these locations safe, given that, you flee from one place to another, hoping to be safe, but this insurgency in the Sahel seems to be quite widespread? Is there continued fear that in some of the areas this violence could reach them as well?
We have seen population movements from rural areas where the violence is mostly happening to urban locations. So increasingly, those movements have accelerated towards urban centers, and we've been working to provide assistance in these locations.
Are the children going to school?
Yes, so we have seen that indeed a lot of many schools have been affected by the violence and have closed. And this has been even further heightened by the spread of COVID. UNHCR is working to rehabilitate schools and classrooms, and is also supporting distance learning opportunities through distribution of radios and solar lights.
All right. So, what kind of assistance do you need from the international community? And if nothing is done, how much in terms of current resources do you still have for how long?
We had the international community had supported the response. UNHCR had appealed for 186 million to provide life-saving protection and emergency assistance in the entire Sahel region. The funds made available are at 74% of the appeal, but we desperately need additional resources, mostly to respond to the shelter needs, the protection needs of those populations, making sure that we can provide core relief items, and that we can continue our work to facilitate access to education for children.
It sounds as if the Burkina Faso government is completely overwhelmed, and they desperately need support to help its citizens.
The local authorities have been the responders, the main responders. The UN and other partners are there to support their efforts. But indeed, as I mentioned previously, they need support. The country needs further support to enhance development, to strengthen national systems, including health systems and educational systems.
This sounds like this is going to be a long-term situation. How does one manage and plan, particularly from a UNHCR and a refugee agency, a scenario for long-term displacement?
Indeed, there seems to be no end in sight. Hence, the importance of having a collective response that is not solely focused on security, and that we really need help in strengthening the humanitarian response and the development of national systems.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much indeed for giving us an update on this desperate situation in the Sahel, where it looks like millions of people have been displaced in a very difficult time, with armed militants causing havoc in that part of the world.